Welcome back to our next lecture in NO 105. With every topic, we've used the life of an individual North American to come to understand some aspect of North American society. Typically, all the people we've met are the sort we look up to in life, excellent role models, maybe to inspire directions in our own lives. We've learned about amazing people who work tirelessly to improve the lives of North Americans. I immediately think of Martin Luther King Jr. and Dolores Huerta. We've met courageous people like Vanna Deltour, who not only survived difficult trials in the Canadian wilderness, but also negotiated peace between First Nations and assumed a critical role in establishing relations between European settlers or colonizers and the Aboriginal peoples of Canada. This time, as we explore the broad topic of violence, crime, and punishment, we encounter an individual no one should look up to. Clifford Olson, one of Canada's most notorious serial killers, was truly evil, and I'm using the quite loaded term evil very deliberately here. There's good reason why he was known as the Beast of BC. Olson was monstrous, but it's important to recognize that he is in some way also a product of Canadian society. As I'll point out in a subsequent part of the lecture, Canadians tend to view themselves as something of a peaceable kingdom in North America. We'll deconstruct that idea more fully later. But for now, as we hear Olson's story, I think it's important for you to just keep in the back of your mind the idea that Olson's story is a Canadian story. We are not immune to violence in this part of the continent. A serial killing spree is perhaps a glaring and obvious example of violence. That said, violence takes many shapes and forms within the nations of North America and across the continent. And how much or how we punish those who commit crimes also says much about our societies. So we'll explore that angle of this public policy issue as well. For now, let's get back to Clifford Olson. For 9 months, from November 1980 to July 1981, the lower mainland of BC, around Vancouver, was the site of a series of grisly murders. In 9 short months, Clifford Olson managed to abduct, drug, and kill 11 children, boys and girls, all between the ages of 9 and 18. The first of his victims was Christine Weller. From Surrey, BC, Weller was abducted by Olson on November the 17th, 1980. The killer developed a consistent and practiced approach to his abductions. Driving in a rented vehicle and dressed well, he would pull up alongside children and very kindly engage them in conversation, often asking for directions. Typically, he'd pretend he was looking for workers, people to do some cleaning in apartments or at construction sites. Once the kids began to engage him in conversation, he'd offer them the jobs and invite them into his vehicle as he drove around to fake potential work sites. Sometimes he would say that he needed to pick up something before the work began, but was willing to pay the kids starting right away. Olson even engaged in something of an interview process, sorting through the kids he encountered to zero in on those more likely to be from broken homes. Once in the car, Olson was disarmingly charming. He appeared kind and courteous. Apparently, some kids did say no to the job offer because they were expected home. Olson would typically drive them home and drop them off. But those who stayed with him in the false hope of working and earning some money were much less likely ever to make it home. These kids would be encouraged to start drinking with Olson, and the drinks were often accompanied by pills. Once they were drunk and drugged, Olson sexually assaulted them. It seems that many of Olson's targets were not then killed. Peter Worthington, a well-known Canadian journalist who interviewed Olson over a long period of time, asked him once why he killed the kids he did. Olson replied, quote, "You know, I asked myself that question 1,000 times. I killed them so they wouldn't tell, but they wouldn't have told anyway. None of the kids I had sex with ever told, and most of them I didn't kill. So why did I do it? I figured it was the booze and the pills I was taking, and of course, the Correctional Service of Canada made me what I am. Locked in a cage makes you into something else." End of Olson's quote there. If Olson made the fateful decision to kill, he would drive his victim to a secluded area. After repeated sexual assaults, he would strangle or bludgeon or stab the person to death. Supposedly, he varied his methods to confuse police. This was the course of events for his 11 young victims. 12-year-old Christine Weller had been the first victim of his serial killing spree, and 17-year-old Louise Chartrand would be his last. She was killed on July 30th, 1981. The very next day, a special RCMP task force looking into cases of missing children in the BC Lower Mainland met. They drafted 2 lists, one of all the potentially missing children, and a second of possible suspects. Olson's name appeared at the top of that list. They made the decision to put Olson under surveillance. The RCMP then watched Olson over a 5-day period in and around the Coquitlam, BC area. As he drove around, police were certain he was searching for his next victim. They actually watched him from a distance as he broke into a series of homes, but allowed him to continue on his predatory journey. Then, on August the 12th, he picked up 2 female hitchhikers in Nanaimo. When they pulled over to drink in Tofino, the police sensed Olson was getting ready to make a move. As soon as the killer started yelling at one of the girls to get out of the car, they moved in and arrested him for drunk driving. In the car, police found Olson's address book. In it, he had written the name of one of his earlier victims, Judy Cosmo. This would prove to be a crucial piece of evidence. The police took him to Burnaby, BC, and charged him with 2 counts of burglary. They then interrogated Olson for 4 days, but he would say nothing about the murders. That all changed when the RCMP located a witness willing to confirm that he had been with Olson on the day when Cosmo went missing, and that the 3 of them had been all together at one point. The same witness also told the police that Olson had drugged and raped him. Confronted with this new evidence, Olson is supposed to have pointed to a poster of missing kids from the Lower Mainland hanging on the wall, identifying the 11 he had murdered. The killer then offered to provide additional information about the murders if he was allowed to serve out his sentence in a psychiatric hospital. That proposal was rejected outright. But the RCMP did come to a controversial agreement with Olson. He would provide them with information to locate the still missing bodies or personal effects of his victims in return for $10,000 for each victim. The $100,000 collected was deposited in a trust fund for Olson's wife, who later divorced the killer. The deal was widely criticized, especially in the media. Some families of Olson's victims even sued to have the fund declared fraudulent, but the legality of the RCMP payment was later confirmed by the courts. Some experts on Olson, who were at first, in fact, quite critical of the deal, have since, with the benefit of hindsight, concluded that it was probably a wise move by the RCMP, given the lack of concrete evidence they had to pin multiple murders on him at the time. With this new evidence revealed, Olson, who had initially planned to plead not guilty, changed his plea to guilty, and the judge lost no time in sentencing him to 11 concurrent life terms in prison, 25 years without the possibility of parole. Olson's appearance in court lasted barely half an hour. Psychologists debate the origins of such criminal minds. Is it nature, nurture, or some combination of the two that contribute to the development of such a serial killer? Certainly, there were signs of a criminal mind from an early age when it came to Olson. He was an enterprising thief who stole milk money from the front porches of homes and returned the stolen merchandise to stores for refunds. He was first formally charged with a crime, break and enter, at 17. Olson's own suggestion that prison itself may be partly responsible for the development of his criminal mind may not be entirely unfounded. From the time he was 17, Olson barely spent 4 years living outside prison. In that short time, his own lawyer has guessed that Olson may have committed an average of 1 sexual offense a day, 7 property crimes each day, and possibly a murder a month. After his murder convictions, Olson continued to cause mischief from his various maximum security prison cells. He served the early part of his sentence in the Kingston Penitentiary, where he was locked up 23 hours a day. It didn't stop him from writing awful letters to the families of his victims. He launched numerous lawsuits against prison authorities for supposed breaches of his charter rights, and he even attempted an escape by concealing a handcuff key in his rectum and then arranging for a transfer to hospital for medical treatment. The key was spotted on an X-ray, foiling the plan. In the end, Olson died of cancer in September 2011, but over the years, and right to the end, he was surrounded in controversy that raised questions about the Canadian criminal justice system. One member of Parliament proposed reinstating the death penalty just for Olson. When it was discovered that he was receiving federal pensions for seniors, the government moved to end the payments. Olson was also something of a poster boy for government efforts to repeal the so-called faint hope clause that allowed prisoners sentenced to life to apply for parole after serving 15 years. Olson typically used these hearings to gain attention, and certainly as opportunities for grandstanding. Serial killers like Olson represent a particular kind of violence that thankfully is not especially common in North America. The horrors of their crimes stand out because of the very fact they are extraordinary. But violence, crime, and punishment take on many forms across the continent. And in subsequent parts of the lecture, we'll explore this theme more fully in each of the North American countries. That's it for this part of the lecture. We'll see you in part 2. Bye for now.
Why do you think I was on a credit?